This is chapter 12 of Kimberly Brubaker Bradley's The War That Saved My Life. All this time, in secret, I'd been messing with Butter. What Miss Smith didn't know I was doing, she couldn't forbid. The Tuesday that she stayed in bed, I sat on him for the first time. I coaxed him to stand beside the stone wall, then climbed the wall, wobbling without my crutches, and threw my bad leg across his back. I grabbed his mane and scrambled, and there I was, astride him. The smell of him rose up around me, and his coat felt warm and prickly against my legs. He walked forward, his swinging steps moving my hips along with him. I held on to his mane for balance. I tried to steer him, but it didn't work, and before long he dropped his head to graze. I didn't mind. I sat on him most that morning until I grew hungry myself. Then I slid off him and went in to eat. The next day, my legs felt wobbly, all stretched out in a new way. I didn't mind that either. It was nothing like as bad as walking. The stables had a storeroom attached. It had been locked, but Jamie'd found the key under a rock near the door. Inside was all sorts of stuff I guess had to do with Becky and her horses. I went looking for straps like I had seen on the pony who raced our train, and I found boxes full of leather pieces, some of them buckled together. I pulled them out and examined them. If you pick up a bridle, which is the leather stuff that goes around the horse's head, by the wrong piece, by the noseband or by the check piece, say, instead of by the headstall, it doesn't look like anything that could go onto a horse. It just looks like a mess of leather. So at first I couldn't make sense of anything. Finally, I found a square thing on a shelf, and it has pieces of paper covered in writing I couldn't read, and partway through had a drawing of a horse's head with the leather pieces fastened round. I studied it and the leather bits until I understood. That afternoon, when I tried to bridle Butter, I must have been using tack that fit one of Becky's bigger horses. I got the headpiece over his ears, but the metal bit hung below his chin, and the part that should have wrapped around his head wrapped around his nostrils instead. He snorted and ran off, trailing the reins. It took me half the afternoon to catch him, and that was with Jamie's help. On Thursday afternoon, when we got home from shopping, I tried a smaller bridle, and everything worked a treat. Butter came to me when I called. I fed him a piece of dried porridge from my pocket. I put the bridle on him, and it fit. I didn't know the words then. Bridle, bit, reins, check piece, or headstall, but I know them now. And the thing with the pieces of paper and the picture of a bridled horse was a book. My first! Anyway, there stood Butter, bridled, and me ready. When I climbed onto him, he sighed and went to put his head down to graze. I yanked on the reins, and he threw his head up, startled. That was better. I kicked him a bit, because I had discovered this would make him move. He walked forward. I pulled on one side of the reins, and he turned. I pulled on both, and he stopped. It was all easy, I thought. I thumped him hard with my legs to try to make him run. He threw his head down, bucked, and tossed me over his ears. I landed on my back in the grass. Jamie ran to me. "Ada, are you dead?" I scrambled to my feet. Not a bit. I got back on, and Butter tried it again. This time, I kept his head up, and he couldn't buck, not exactly, so he jumped sideways and got me off that way instead. I thunked my head on the ground and went dizzy for a moment. "You can have a turn," I said to Jamie. He shook his head. "I don't want one. I don't think he likes it." I considered this. Butter might not like it right this moment, but when he was used to eating all day long. But he'd like it later, when we were running out in the open, soaring over stone walls. He'd like it then. I liked it right away. Falling off didn't scare me. Learning to ride was like learning to walk. It hurt, but I kept on. If Miss Smith wondered why my new blouse was covered in grass stains or how my new skirt got a rip near the hem, she never said a thing. She just sighed as usual and threw the shirt into the wash boiler and mended the rip with a shiny metal thing like a toothpick and a piece of thread. "Why does she make that noise?" Jamie asked at night. He imitated Mrs. Smith's sigh. It wasn't a noise Ma'am had ever made. I shrugged. "She doesn't like us? She didn't want us, remember? I tried not to make much work.